I never wanted to go to that damn party in the first place. Jennifer had been talking up for weeks. How it was the event of the season, how the Clarendon Club was impossible to get into unless you were connected, how it was important for me to be there. I knew what that meant. It meant standing quietly at her side while she paraded through circles of high-powered colleagues who didn't know me, didn't care to know me, and saw me as nothing more than a guy who married up. Still, I went. I put on the suit she liked, the one that made me feel stiff and small at the same time. I shaved, I smiled, I played the part. I even rehearsed some polite small talk in the car on the way over, like an actor preparing for a scene where the character doesn't know he's about to be humiliated. The Clarendon was exactly what I expected. Ornate chandeliers, velvet drapes, and people who talk like they were always waiting for you to finish speaking, so they could talk about themselves. I'd barely stepped inside before I realized I didn't belong. The first few handshakes were dry, limp, forgettable. Every introduction Jennifer made included my name and nothing else. Not what I did, not what I was passionate about. Just, this is Cameron. And then she turned back to them like I was a placeholder. I wandered through conversations I wasn't part of, holding a glass of bourbon I didn't want, nodding too much, laughing too little. At one point, a woman, I think she was in marketing, asked me if I was in law too. I said no, that I worked in operations at a logistics firm. She nodded like I just admitted I wash windows. Then she turned and started talking to someone else without another word. Jennifer didn't even notice. It only got worse when Ethan Monroe, her firm's golden boy and, for what I could tell, part-time jackass, stumbled to the center of the room, drink in hand, cheeks flushed with whiskey and self-satisfaction. Everyone quieted down like a king was about to speak. I stayed by the bar, half hoping he'd say something dumb enough to make me feel less alone. I got more than I bargained for. He raised his glass and slurred something about gratitude, about the firm's great year, about power couples, whatever that meant. And then, with this smug little grin, he said it, "Here's to the men who pay the bills while we take their wives to success." The room burst into laughter. Real laughter. Not nervous or polite. Genuine, knee-slapping laughter. I looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to look uncomfortable. But no, they were all in on the joke. Every one of them. And Jennifer, she didn't laugh. But she didn't stop it either. She didn't speak. She didn't turn to me. She didn't even flinch. She just stood there, frozen in that perfect dress, holding her wine glass and letting the joke hang in the air like it was harmless. Like I hadn't just been gutted in front of a room full of people who already didn't see me. I don't even remember setting the glass down. I just remember the burn in my throat that had nothing to do with alcohol. I walked out slowly, not wanting to make a scene, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of knowing they got to me. No one followed me, no one stopped me. I stepped into the cold Manhattan air, took a deep breath, and tried not to cry in front of the doorman. It wasn't the toast itself. It was everything wrapped around it. The months of being overlooked, the way Jennifer always seemed just a little embarrassed by how simple I would compare to her colleagues, the way she brushed me off when I asked about her cases, like I wouldn't understand. It was realizing that I'd been funding a life I was never really a part of, that I'd become a side character in my own marriage. And worst of all, it was knowing she didn't defend me. She didn't say a word. The ride back from Clarendon felt longer than it actually was, like the city had stretched itself out just to make me sit in that silence a little longer. I didn't play music. I didn't speak. I just kept my hands on the wheel and tried to keep the burn in my chest from spilling over into something I couldn't control. By the time I walked to the front door, kicked off my shoes, and sat down in the dark, the weight of the night finally hit me. Not just a toast, not just Jennifer's silence, but the years that led up to it, all stacked neatly behind a moment like bricks in a wall I'd been too tired to notice being built. The thing is, this wasn't the first time. It never is it? When you're humiliated publicly, it's never just that one moment. It's the last domino in a long line of quiet slights, invisible wounds that never quite scab over. I sat there on the couch for what must have been hours, just breathing, trying to work backward through time, pulling at every thread until I could see the whole fabric unravel. I remember the way she always introduced me at her events, how she'd say it like she was embarrassed. Cameron works in IT, or he runs a little cybersecurity thing. It used to annoy me, but I brushed it off, told myself it didn't matter. I thought, maybe she's just keeping things simple for people. I gave her every benefit of the doubt, because that's what you do when you think you're building something together. But I see it now. She wasn't simplifying. She was diminishing. I don't work in IT. I built Titan Secure Tech from the ground up, from a one-man operation in our garage, surviving on instant noodles and sleepless nights. to a full-scale cybersecurity firm with close to 50 employees and clients that include government agencies and multi-million-dollar corporations. I've spent over a decade growing that company, hiring staff, handling contracts, meeting investors, keeping up with an industry that evolves by the hour. I've sacrificed weekends, vacations, sleep, and more than I ever admitted, just to keep it running, to keep it thriving. But to Jennifer, it was never impressive, never worth mentioning. Even in casual conversations with friends or family, she always had this tone, like what I did wasn't real work, or at least not work worth talking about. I could be coming off a contract with a Fortune 500 company, and she'd roll her eyes and say something like, "Cam's been buried in another one of his computer caves." I'd laugh, shrug it off, because what else was I supposed to do? I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to embarrass her, even when she had no problem doing that to me. Over and over again, I thought about the time when her colleagues, some finance guy with slick hair and a permanent smirk, asked me if Titan was just some freelance thing. Jennifer didn't correct him. She didn't say, "Actually, he's the CEO." She just smiled and let the comment float. I remember watching her from across the room, listening to her describe me as good with computers to a group of lawyers, and feeling my stomach twist. That wasn't just lazy phrasing, that was a choice. The truth is, Jennifer never understood what I did because she never tried to. She was happy to spend the money Titan brought in, happy to decorate our home with the profits of a business she refused to acknowledge. She loved the lifestyle, but never respected the labor behind it. She didn't ask about my work. She didn't read the press when we landed big clients. She never came to the office, never met my team, never even asked how things were going unless it was about money. And now I wonder, was it just ignorance? Or was it that somewhere deep down, she didn't want to succeed beyond her? Because success to Jennifer had always been about optics, about degrees, titles, who you knew, where you were invited. I didn't have the Ivy League law degree. I didn't schmooze at rooftop bars. I didn't have the right kind of polish. I guess I just worked. I built. I stayed quiet and did the damn job. But in her world, that wasn't glamorous. That wasn't prestigious. It wasn't the kind of thing you brag about at cocktail parties or listed on gala invitations. I thought about all the dinners, the conversations, the way her face would shift when I talked about a new contract or an innovation we were rolling out. That forced smile, the way she'd glance at her phone or change the subject, like I was boring her, like I was wasting her time. At first, I told myself it was because she didn't get the tech world. I told myself, she's tired, she's stressed. It's not personal. But deep down, I knew. You feel it when someone doesn't believe in you. You feel it even when they don't say a word. So I stopped talking. I stopped sharing. I stopped bringing up Titan altogether unless she asked, which she rarely did. I let her pretend I was just some background character in her life, someone stable and quiet, someone who didn't demand attention, someone she could conveniently box into a narrative where she was the one climbing, and I was the one staying put. And I let her. That's on me. But sitting there that night, with my suit jacket still on and the silence pressing around me, I finally let it all hit me. I had spent years shrinking myself to make Jennifer more comfortable, hiding my pride to protect her ego, letting her erase me piece by piece until I barely recognized myself in our marriage. And it all came to a head with a single toast, a single laugh, a single moment of silence that said more than any cruel joke ever could. Saturday mornings used to be quiet. I'd wake up first, make coffee, maybe check my email before the city started humming again. But that morning felt different. I was already awake before the sun fully rose, lying there with my thoughts racing, my body still, but my mind running laps. Jennifer was still asleep, her back turned to me like always, like I wasn't even there. I got out of bed without making a sound, walked downstairs, and sat at the kitchen table in the kind of silence that feels thick, like it's pressing in on you. That's when I saw her iPad, sitting there on the counter where she always left it. Screen dark, but inviting. No passcode. She never bothered with one, never needed to, I suppose. Trust, right? I didn't go looking for anything. That's what I told myself. I wasn't snooping. I just picked it up because my own laptop was upstairs and I wanted to check the news, distract myself from the mess in my head. But the moment the screen lit up, I saw a text notification at the top, Ethan Monroe. I froze, not because I expected anything explicit. No, Ethan wasn't stupid. He was the kind of man who knew how to keep things just subtle enough to stay deniable. But something about seeing his name there on her lock screen at 6:17 a.m. made something tighten in my chest. I tapped the message. It wasn't even particularly dramatic, just 5 words. "Thanks for last night, Jay." My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't move for a long time. I could put it down, could have walked away, and kept pretending I didn't feel the ground shifting beneath me for the past year. But I didn't. I opened the thread at first. It was just what I expected. Messages about work, long days, firm drama. Harmless on the surface. But then I saw the tone shift. Words like, "I needed that," and "you get me." Mentions of drinks after work that I'd never heard about. Dinners at places we used to go together. One message from her read, "I'm still thinking about our conversation by the river. No one's ever seen that side of me before." That one hit like a punch to the gut. I kept scrolling. It felt like watching my own marriage dissolve in real time. A digital trail of trust slipping away in blue and gray bubbles. They never cross into anything overtly sexual. No declarations of love. No naked photos. But that almost made it worse. This wasn't lust. It was intimacy. It was her turning to someone else for comfort, connection, validation. The things that used to be mine. She told him things she never told me. She complained about feeling claustrophobic at home. Said she felt more alive when they were together. She even joked once about how easy it was to lie to me, how I never asked too many questions. I read that one twice, then 3 more times, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. But I hadn't. I sat there, my hands cold and steady, scrolling through months of betrayals served in polite, well-punctuated sentences. He wasn't just her colleague. He was her escape, her emotional outlet, her confidant. They had inside jokes, little phrases they repeated, stories they referenced like shared memories. And all of it happening while she came home to me, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I remembered to pay the gas bill. There was one message, one that gutted me more than the others. She wrote, "You make me feel seen." Simple, honest, cruel, because I couldn't remember the last time she'd looked at me like I was anything more than a fixture in the house, a provider, a placeholder. But Ethan made her feel seen. I took screenshots of everything, every thread, every dinner, every whispered doubt. I moved quietly, methodically, like I was documenting a crime scene. I uploaded the files to a hidden folder in the cloud, encrypted, off her radar. I erased any trace of what I'd done, cleared the cache, deleted the recent apps. I'd done this kind of thing for clients a dozen times before, covering tracks, hiding footprints, doing it in my own home, on my wife's device. Felt like something out of a dream I didn't want to be awake for. When I was done, I set the iPad back down in the exact same spot, screen dark again like nothing had happened. But everything had. I stood in the kitchen, letting it all settle. The quiet still hung in the air, but now it was different, heavier. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was truth. Cold, documented, undeniable truth. And there was no going back. Sunday morning came wrapped in the same cold silence that had settled over the house like a fog. Jennifer moved around the kitchen like nothing had changed, sipping her coffee, typing something into her phone with that distracted smirk she always had when she was texting him. She told me she had to go into the office for a few hours. Something about reviewing a contract that couldn't wait, said in that overly casual tone people use when they're already lying. I nodded, didn't question it, just smiled and told her to take her time. She kissed me on the cheek, still pretending, and walked out the door dressed too well for Sunday in the office. I waited until I heard her car leave the driveway before I exhaled and stood up. The moment the house was quiet again, I got to work. I took my coffee into the home office, locked the door, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was text my corporate attorney, David Chong. We'd worked together for years, and I trusted him more than anyone outside my company. I didn't give him details. Just asked if he could jump on a quick call within the hour. He said yes immediately. While I waited, I pulled up Titan's vendor contracts folder and went straight to the Kingsley and Monroe file. 6 years' worth of legal services, all meticulously itemized, signed, and billed through Jennifer's firm. Not just the occasional consultation either. Full legal retainers, contracts, patent filings, IP protections, litigation prep, ongoing compliance reviews. They had touched almost every legal aspect of my company, and Jennifer had handled none of it personally. She stayed completely hands-off with our account, and I'd always thought it was a good thing. Professional boundaries. But now, looking at those documents with fresh eyes, I realized she had never needed to involve herself because the checks always cleared. By the time David called, I had the figures up on the screen. I laid out the situation for him calmly, clinically, like I was reading off a report. I told him I was preparing to sever ties with Kingsley and Monroe. I told him we needed to review every contract we had with them and start preparing replacement counsel. I didn't say Jennifer's name. I didn't mention Ethan. But David didn't need to ask. He just said, understood, and started outlining the transition steps. We agreed on a confidentiality lock. Internal access to the audit would be limited to me, David, and my COO. After we hung up, I called Meredith, my chief operating officer. She answered on the second ring, even though it was a weekend. That's the kind of loyalty Meredith has. I told her we needed to prepare a full financial audit of Kingsley and Monroe's contract history with Titan. No warning to the firm. No notices yet. Just numbers. She didn't flinch. She knew something serious was happening, but didn't press for details. That's another reason I trust her. She asked if I had a time frame. I told her 48 hours. I wanted a report by Tuesday morning. Total spend, categorized by year, by project, by case. She said she'd get the team working and call on our finance director first thing Monday. When I hung up, I opened a spreadsheet and began breaking the numbers down myself. I already knew the rough total. Just over $5.4 million. Spread over 6 years. I'd signed every check. Approved every wire. But I had never once thought about what percentage of our legal spend that represented. I ran the calculation. 43%. Nearly half our annual legal budget went to her firm. 43% of our legal lifeblood. And she had no idea. Not once did Jennifer connect the dots between Titan Secure Tech and a quiet, reliable revenue stream that had padded her firm's books for years. It was probably just another account to her. Another line in a quarterly report she didn't bother reading. The realization hit me like a slap. She didn't just disrespect me personally, she built her professional success on my money without ever acknowledging it. The firm that helped her rise, where she earned her partnership, where she networked, climbed, and built her name. Almost half of their tech revenue had come from me. My company, the one she minimized in conversations. The one she referred to as his little cybersecurity business. When she didn't feel like explaining, she'd been standing in rooms talking about her victories. Her firm's growth. While Titan floated their billables, I pulled every receipt, every email chain, every retainer renewal. I created a timeline, date of contract, scope of work, billable hours, lead attorneys. I highlighted every case where Ethan Monroe had been involved. There were 4, for different matters where he'd served as lead counsel, which meant he knew exactly how much business was coming from me, which meant he knew who I was Jennifer's husband, and still raised his glass Friday night with that smug smile and mocked me like I was nothing. I didn't rage. I didn't break anything. I just sat there, cataloging every detail, letting the facts speak louder than emotion ever could. My revenge wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be messy. It was going to be precise, documented, legal, controlled. And when it happened, they wouldn't even see it coming. Because the truth was, I hadn't just been Jennifer's husband. I had been her firm's biggest client. And she never saw me. Not really. But now she would. I arrived at Kingsley and Monroe at exactly 7:26 a.m. I waited in the lobby just long enough for the receptionist to catch my name and nearly stumble over a coffee when she realized who I was. The partners weren't expecting me this early, but they were expecting me. I made sure that the night before when I sent a short, clipped message to their managing partner's direct email. We need to meet. 7:30 a.m. sharp. No assistants, no junior associates. I didn't sign it with a title. I need to. My name alone was enough when your company pays over $5 million to a law firm across 6 years. They escorted me into a sleek glass conference room on the top floor, the kind with a view of the skyline, and a table big enough to seat 20. It was empty save for the 3 most senior partners, Cynthia Ward, Patrick Levesque, and of course, Jennifer's mentor, Paul Gaines. Their faces were polite, but confused. No one said anything as I sat down. I didn't greet them. I opened my laptop, connected it to the screen on the wall, and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of crystal glasses clinking and ambient chatter from a Clarendon club. Then Ethan's voice rang out, drunk, smug, cutting. Here's to the men who pay the bills while we take their wives to success. Laughter followed, clear and unmistakable. I watched their faces. Cynthia looked down, suddenly very interested in her legal pad. Patrick flinched. Paul didn't blink, but his jaw set tight. I didn't speak until the audio stopped. Then I stood up, placed a manila folder on the table, and slid across to Cynthia. Inside were color printouts of the messages between Ethan and Jennifer, just enough to draw a clear, undeniable picture. No innuendo, no ambiguity. It wasn't about sex. It was about betrayal, dishonesty, and ethical rot. When she opened it and saw Ethan's name, her hand stiffened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just stated the facts. For 6 years, Titan SecureTech has retained Kingsley and Monroe as our primary legal counsel. In that time, we've paid you over $5.4 million in legal fees. That represents 43% of your firm's annual revenue from tech sector clients. I have personally signed every one of those payments. And until last Friday night, I tolerated the dismissiveness, the ignorance, the subtle slights. But what I won't tolerate is watching your partner mock me in public while maintaining a secret emotional relationship with my wife behind my back. They stayed quiet. I let the silence stretch. You have until 9 a.m. to make a decision. Either Ethan Monroe is terminated immediately and the firm issues a formal written apology to Titan SecureTech, or we sever all contracts by noon. Every active matter will be reassigned. Every outstanding invoice will be disputed, and every future engagement will go through a competing firm. I suggest you move quickly. Paul tried to speak, tried to soften it, asked for clarification, but I cut him off. This is a negotiation. It's a courtesy. I closed my laptop, stood, and walked out without another word. By the time I got back to my car, it was 8:17 a.m. My phone buzzed once Meredith, my COO, got a call from Monroe's CFO. He's been pulled into an emergency partner meeting. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I just waited. At exactly 9:02 a.m., a new message came through. It was a photo sent from someone inside the building. Ethan Monroe, suit jacket slung over one shoulder, walking out of the office with two partners flanking him. His face was pale. No security. No drama. But the message was clear. He was out. 5 minutes later, Jennifer's name lit up my screen. First, it was a question mark. Then what happened? Then did you do something? Then, Cameron, call me now. I didn't answer. I watched as the dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Panic on her end. Confusion finally breaking through the wall of delusion she had built so confidently around her life. For years, she had treated me like the silent partner in her narrative. A man who stayed in the background, who funded the life she wanted but never asked for credit. She never thought to ask who paid the bills because she assumed the money would always be there. She never thought to ask what Titan truly was, or what I had built, because she never thought it mattered. But now, as the foundation she stood on began to crack under her, she was starting to understand. She didn't just underestimate me. She never saw me at all. But today, she saw exactly who I was. At exactly 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the process server stepped off the elevator and walked straight toward the corner office with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the one with Jennifer's name etched in polished chrome beside the door. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask for directions, didn't look unsure. He moved like a man with a job to do. The receptionist barely had time to rise from her chair before he tapped on a glass, slid the thick envelope under his arm into view, and said her name loud enough that half the floor turned to look. "Jennifer Monroe?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. She looked up, confused, distracted, probably thinking it was another routine delivery. But as soon as he handed her the envelope and said, "You've been served," everything in her face changed. I had planned every detail. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity, about letting her feel the weight of consequence with the same cold precision she had shown me for years. The glass office, the public setting, the silence that followed as her colleague stared, all of it designed to cut through her denial. She opened the envelope too fast, hands shaking slightly, lips pressed into a thin line. I imagined her eyes scanning the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Cause irreconcilable differences. No room for argument. No ambiguity." The first call came before the server even left the building. I didn't answer. She called again 2 minutes later. Then again. Then a text. "Cameron, please." Another. "What are you doing? We need to talk. Please." I let it sit. The words didn't sting. They barely registered. At 2:14, she called a fourth time. This time, I answered. Her voice was brittle, desperate, like she was forcing calm and failing. "What is this?" she asked. "What the hell is this, Cam?" I didn't rush. I let the silence hang. Then I said, "It's a divorce, Jennifer." She exhaled like she'd been punched. "No, wait. No. We need to talk. Can we please just talk before this gets out of control? You can't just—" I cut her off. "You stood there," I said. My voice was flat, Not angry, just final. You stood there and let him humiliate me in front of an entire room. You said nothing. That's all I needed to see. Her voice cracked. It wasn't like that. I didn't know he was going to. Cameron, I was in shock. I didn't laugh. I didn't. Please, you know I would never intentionally let something like that happen. It was one stupid comment. I almost laughed at that. One stupid comment? As if the toast had been the first brick laid in this foundation of betrayal. As if the months of secret dinners, the quiet messages, the lies about her whereabouts hadn't happened. As if I hadn't watched her, night after night, retreat into her phone with a smile she never once gave me anymore. You didn't need to laugh, I said. You just needed to say something. But you didn't, because you didn't see a problem with it. There was a pause, and then, softly, she said, it wasn't a fair. I stared at the floor, let the weight of that sentence sit between us like a corpse. You're telling me you didn't sleep with him? I asked. No, never. I swear to God, Cameron, I would never cheat on you. I nodded to myself. Okay, so you never crossed that line. But you lied, repeatedly. You shared parts of yourself with him that were supposed to be mine. You confided in him. You went behind my back. You let him disrespect me, and you did nothing. That's not cheating to you. She didn't answer. That's not betrayal? Her breath caught. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But it did, I said, and you didn't stop it. You kept choosing it. Every text, every dinner, every you make me feel seen. You knew exactly what you were doing. I could hear her crying now, trying to hold it in, but failing. I was lost, Cameron. I didn't feel connected to you anymore. You were always working, always locked in that office, and I felt invisible. I almost said it then, that I felt invisible too, that I'd felt it for years. But I didn't. She didn't get that part. Not anymore. I know what I built. I know who I am. I said, you never did, and now it's too late. She begged then, her voice unraveling completely, promising to go to counseling, to fix things, to step away from the firm, from everything, if we could just talk, just pause the papers. But I was already gone. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I had left the marriage the moment she looked away at that dinner and said nothing. I had spent years holding space for someone who never once held it for me, and now I was done. I hung up without saying goodbye. The fallout came faster than even I expected. Once the initial shock wore off and the firm realized just how deep the financial damage ran, the rest began to unravel like a frayed rope snapping strand by strand. Within 3 days of Ethan's termination, Jennifer was quietly placed on administrative leave. No official announcement, no memos, just a closed-door meeting with the managing partners and a silent escort out of the building under the pretense of a personal leave of absence. But everyone inside Kingsley and Monroe knew what it meant. The whispers had already begun. People talked. Of course they did. Offices like that thrive on rumors disguised as concern. Associates exchanged glances in the hallways. Assistants hovered near open doors a little longer, and by Friday, Jennifer's name was no longer mentioned in meetings. Her glass-walled office remained dark, blinds drawn, as if sealing away the embarrassment like a stain they hoped would fade with time. It didn't. The moment people found out the firm's biggest client had walked away over a partner's inappropriate relationship with another partner's spouse, the air shifted. The text started trickling in. A colleague of mine who'd once been at Kingsley and Monroe sent me a message. It's chaos over there. Everyone's scared. They're hemorrhaging. Another one wrote, never seen them scramble like this. Your name's radioactive in that building. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I'd already moved my company's legal portfolio to a firm with better ethics and zero tolerance for arrogance disguised as charm. Jennifer, for her part, tried to hold on. She contacted HR to plead her case, to insist that her relationship with Ethan had never interfered with client matters. But when the internal audit began to reveal just how intertwined they had become, shared client meetings, casual dinners billed as business development, undisclosed conflicts, her position was no longer defensible. No matter how careful she'd been, the pattern was clear. She let her personal entanglement jeopardize the firm's single most lucrative contract. That was her legacy. She resigned before they could officially fire her. She spun it as a personal choice to pursue new opportunities. But anyone who saw her face in the days leading up to it knew better. Her departure wasn't dignified. It was a quiet exit through the service elevator. With a cardboard box and a forced smile, trying to avoid eye contact with the people who used to envy her. She landed a position 3 weeks later, but it wasn't a win. It was survival. A lateral move on paper, but with a $40,000 salary cut at a firm no one had heard of, doing work 2 tiers below what she used to handle. The kind of firm that hired her for name recognition, but kept her at arm's length, unwilling to put real weight behind her title. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she spends most of her time in backroom compliance meetings, buried in routine paperwork, managing accounts too small to matter. A far cry from the high-stakes mergers and litigation she once boasted about over wine. As for Ethan, he discovered just how small the legal world becomes when your ego finally outruns your reputation. Fired for insulting a top client, one who also happened to fund almost half the firm's tech sector business, he became a liability no one wanted to touch. His name, once thrown around in conversations about future partner promotions and panel invites, became a punchline. Don't pull Monroe. I overheard someone say at a conference weeks later, laughing, "You might end up jobless and banned from the good golf courses." He tried to pivot, of course. Took a senior associate role at a boutique firm with delusions of expansion, but they offered him a salary 30% lower than what he'd been making, with no clear track to partnership. He went from being the man who toasted himself in front of 100 people to a name that made hiring committees wince. And every job he applied for had the same problem. Me? My name was attached to the reason he was fired. My company was the one he insulted, and no serious firm wanted to risk taking on that shadow. Kingsley and Monroe didn't survive and scathed either. Losing Titan Secure Tech's contract gutted them. It wasn't just the money, it was what the loss represented. Other clients started asking questions. If a firm couldn't keep its top client happy, what else were they mishandling? Over the next quarter, 2 other major tech companies followed my lead and pulled their business. Not because I asked them to, but because reputation matters, especially in law. Word spreads, trust evaporates. By the end of the fiscal year, the firm had lost close to half its revenue from tech sector clients. They tried to restructure, downsize staff, merge departments, cancel the firm-wide retreat that Jennifer used to plan every spring, but the damage was done. Kingsley and Monroe would survive, probably, but never the level it once had. The prestige was gone. The polish cracked, and the firm was now a cautionary tale in boardrooms where no one had ever heard of me until suddenly they all had. I didn't gloat. I didn't send emails. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence said it all. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a few weeks after everything had settled, or at least after the storm had passed. I was sitting at a quiet cafe near the Titan office, nursing a black coffee, and reviewing notes for a new government contract we were preparing to close. The air felt different these days. Lighter. Still, for the first time in what felt like years, there was no weight pressing against my chest, no nagging sense that I was being overlooked in my own life. Business was stronger than it had ever been. 3 new clients signed on in the span of 10 days, each one recommended by someone who had watched the Kingsley and Monroe fall out from a distance and decided they wanted to work with the man who'd stood his ground. That was when I saw her. Jennifer walked in quietly, almost hesitantly, dressed down in a way that didn't look natural on her. She scanned the cafe like she wasn't sure this was still a place she had permission to enter, then spotted me and walked over. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I just looked up and waited. She stopped in front of the table and asked if she could sit. I said nothing for a moment, then nodded once, short and neutral. She slid into the chair across from me, like she was afraid it might collapse. She didn't speak right away, just wrapped her hands around a to-go cup and stared at it like the right words might rise with the steam. Then, without lifting her eyes, she said, "I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to argue. I needed to say some things." I let her speak. I didn't owe her anything, but I wanted to hear it. She said she was sorry, not for what she did, though she acknowledged it, but for what she failed to do. She admitted that she had minimized my success for years, not because she didn't see it, but because seeing it made her feel small. She said that being surrounded by people in her world, driven, aggressive, ruthless, had made her feel like accomplishments only mattered when they were loud. That Titan's quiet, steady growth threatened her in ways she didn't understand at the time. That I was consistent, humble, focused, and that somewhere along the line, instead of being proud of that, she resented it. She told me she envied me, not just professionally, but emotionally, the way I stayed grounded, the way I didn't need external validation, the way I moved through the world with quiet certainty while she was still chasing approval in every room she entered. And somewhere in all that envy, she begun to chip away at me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to respect, at least not in the way she thought she was supposed to respect a man. She said she had lost everything: her job, her credibility, her place in the firm, the friendships that evaporated once people realized she was no longer worth aligning with. She said she understood now, too late, that she had spent years standing next to a man she didn't deserve. Her voice cracked a little when she asked if we could ever talk. Just talk. Not to fix everything, not to erase the past, but to maybe start over in some way, or at least to find something like forgiveness. I looked at her for a long time. I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. That had burned itself out in the days and nights after the divorce papers landed in her hands. What I felt now was colder, cleaner. It was peace, and in that peace, I saw her for exactly what she was. Not a villain, not a monster. Just a woman who had mistaken proximity for possession, who believed that because I stood beside her, I would always stay behind her. I set my coffee down gently and said one word, quietly but with no hesitation. No. She blinked like she hadn't heard me, then swallowed hard, just like that. I nodded. Exactly like that, she looked away then, toward the window, her jaw clenched in a way that told me she wasn't used to being denied. But she didn't push. She didn't cry. She just sat there in that uncomfortable stillness, knowing she had nothing left to offer that could shift a moment. I stood, gathered my things, and paused before leaving. I didn't walk away to hurt you, I said. I walked away because I finally realized you never really saw me. Not once. And I'm not interested in shrinking myself again just so someone else can feel tall standing next to me. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. I walked out into the sunlight, the warmth on my skin almost surreal. Business was good. My team respected me. My name, once overlooked in every introduction, now carried weight in rooms I used to be invisible in. But none of that was the real win. The real win was clarity. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies. I had peace, purpose, and the quiet, steady satisfaction of knowing that I had rebuilt a life not out of spite, but out of truth, and that truth was simple. I didn't lose anything. I let go,